A small civilization lived far away from the noise of big cities and modern life. Their world was surrounded by thick green forests, tall mountains, and clear-flowing rivers. The air there felt different, clean, calm, and peaceful. This place was home to the Volari, a community that valued simplicity, respect, and harmony. They were not interested in showing their greatness to the world. They only aimed to live in balance with nature and with each other. The Volari had lived in that region for many generations. Their ancestors had discovered how to grow food in a way that did not harm the land. They created clever systems for water to flow from the mountains into their farms. They built wooden homes that stayed warm in winter and cool in summer. They knew the voices of birds, the seasons of plants, and the secrets of herbs that could heal sickness. Their knowledge did not come from books. It came from listening, observing, and learning from the land around them. Their days began early with the sunrise. Men and women worked together in the fields, tending to crops, repairing tools, and collecting water. Children played while also learning from the elders. In Volari culture, every child was taught from a young age that the land was not something they owned. It was something they were responsible for. The mountains were their protectors. The river was their friend. The forests were sacred. They believed that everything alive had a spirit, even stones and soil. Meals were simple but full of flavor. Fresh vegetables, fruits, and grains were the heart of their diet. Whenever they cooked, they thanked the earth for feeding them. Whenever they used wood, they thanked the trees. Gratitude was a natural part of their life. They did not need to be reminded to appreciate things. It was simply how they lived. Their festivals were quiet but beautiful. The Volari loved music, but it was not the loud or wild kind. Their songs were gentle and meaningful. Some were sung to celebrate the harvest. Some were sung to welcome newborns. Some were sung to honor those who had passed away. The Volari believed that every soul remained part of the land even after death, so they never felt alone. They felt surrounded by the spirits of those they loved. The community was small, but it felt whole. There were no rulers giving orders. Decisions were made through discussions where everyone's voice mattered. If there was disagreement, they talked until peace was restored. In their culture, anger was seen as a storm, strong but temporary. Peace was like the earth itself, steady and eternal. If someone ever acted selfishly, the community reminded them gently that life was easier when shared. For many years, the world outside barely knew the Volari existed. Only a few travelers who wandered too far spoke of them. These travelers told stories of skilled farmers, wise healers, and peaceful people who did not chase wealth or fame. Some listeners believed the stories. Others thought they were just legends told by tired travelers. And the Volari continued with their lives untouched by doubt, untouched by greed. The Volari were also known for their unique way of healing. They had deep knowledge of plants, leaves, roots, and flowers. They knew how to make herbal mixtures that could cure fever, reduce pain, and even calm a troubled heart. Sometimes people from distant villages traveled many days just to ask for help. The Volari never rejected anyone. They helped them with kindness, asked for nothing in return, and sent them home with food for the journey. But once the outsiders were healed, they were not encouraged to stay. The Volari believed that their peace depended on keeping their community small and protected. The children of the Volari learned stories, not just lessons. Their elders told them tales about the past, about how their people once lived closer to other settlements. In those days there was contact and trade, but also conflict and jealousy. Their ancestors saw how greed could spread like fire and destroy everything good. So they chose isolation, not out of fear but out of wisdom. They chose a life where hunger and desire did not control them. Even with their isolation, the Volari did not fear the outside world. They simply respected distance. They knew that the world beyond the mountains was full of things they did not need: wealth, competition, and endless wanting. Their own lives were full, complete, and meaningful. Nature gave them everything: food, shelter, beauty, purpose. And in return, they treated the land with love and care. The Volari children grew up watching sunsets and learning patience. They did not rush. They did not measure life in hours or minutes. They measured life in seasons and harvests and the slow and steady growth of things. They saw how the smallest seed could become a great tree, but only with time, care, and stillness. So they learned early that everything meaningful needed patience. The elders of the Volari were deeply respected. Their hair was silver, their hands wrinkled, but their eyes shone with wisdom. They were the keepers of stories, traditions, and ancient lessons. They taught that there was no glory in war, no pride in domination. They believed the greatest strength was the ability to remain kind, even when one had the power to be cruel. They believed that peace was not weakness, it was mastery. Because of this mindset, the Valari rarely argued, rarely divided, rarely lost themselves to selfishness. They did not chase progress for the sake of progress. They improved their tools slowly and only when needed. They did not cut down more trees than necessary. They did not waste food or water. They understood limits and they respected them. Their civilization may have been small, but it was rich in meaning. Every person knew their purpose. Every voice mattered. Every action was taken with care, and yet the Valari had no idea that the world outside was changing quickly. They did not know that large companies were searching for untouched land. They did not know that the forests they loved were marked on maps as areas to be developed. They did not know that others looked at their home and saw profit where they saw paradise. Their peaceful world stood on the edge of something they could not yet see. Their calm life continued like always: sunrise, work, laughter, music, rest. But a storm was coming. A storm of noise, power, and greed. A storm that would test everything they believed in. For now, the Valari remained unaware. Their civilization stood strong in its quiet beauty, but peace, no matter how deep, can be shaken when the outside world decides it wants more. When the developers first arrived near the Valari lands, there was no sound of warning. It started quietly, like a distant echo of something unfamiliar. A few men came walking through the woods carrying notebooks, cameras, and measuring tools. They were surprised when they saw the peaceful farms and clean water channels. They had heard rumors about a small, isolated group living in the mountains, but they never expected such beauty and such simplicity. To them, the land looked rich, rich with water, rich with fertile soil, and rich with possibilities to build something large and profitable. At first, the Valari welcomed them politely. The Valari believed that every guest deserved respect, even strangers. They offered fresh fruits, water to drink, and a place to rest from their long journey. The visitors smiled but did not understand the customs of gratitude. They looked around with eyes that measured value, not beauty. While the Valari spoke about the blessings of nature, the visitors whispered among themselves about business plans and expansion. The Valari tried to explain who they were. They told the visitors that the land was sacred to them, not because of ownership, but because it held the spirits of their ancestors. They told them how trees were not just wood, but protectors of life. They told them the river was not just water, but a guardian of the community. But the visitors had come from a world where land had price tags and where nature was something to be used, not respected. Days passed, and more outsiders arrived. This time they did not come walking. They came with machines, trucks, and metal equipment. They started marking trees with paint and placing tall red flags in the ground. The Valari watched this quietly at first, unsure of what was happening. When they asked why these markings were being placed, the outsiders smiled and said they were planning to improve the land. The Valari did not understand the word improve in this context. To them, the land was already perfect. How could one improve something that had grown naturally, beautifully, and patiently over centuries? The developers tried to explain about roads, buildings, and factories. They spoke about job opportunities, modern facilities, and economic growth. But these words meant nothing to the Valari. They did not measure life in money or trade. They measured life in harmony and peace. They did not want roads that would bring more people and more noise. They did not want factories that would turn their fresh air into smell and smoke. They did not want buildings that would block sunlight or cast shadows over fields. So the Valari elders gathered and went to speak to the developers peacefully. They shared their concerns in calm voices. They asked the developers to leave the land untouched. They suggested that if outsiders wanted to learn, exchange knowledge, or visit peacefully, they were welcome. But they could not allow the destruction of forests or soil. The developers did not take them seriously. They saw the Valari as a small, powerless group. They were polite at first, but their politeness was empty. They believed that since the Valari had no official documents, no government power, and no modern influence, they had no claim over the land. They said, "This land belongs to the nation, not to you," and continued their work. Machines began moving into the fields where vegetables grew. The noise shattered the peace of the land. Birds flew away. Animals ran deep into the woods. The Valari watched in disbelief as crops were crushed under heavy tires. Every sound of metal digging the soil felt like a deep wound. Still, the Valari tried to reason. They stood in front of the machines. They blocked the path, not with anger or weapons, but with silent, firm presence. They believed that if the outsiders saw their dedication, they would understand. But the workers laughed. Some mocked their clothing, their calm faces, their peaceful beliefs. To them, the Valari looked backward, uneducated and weak. The Valari were not weak. They simply believed that peace was stronger than violence. But peace alone was no shield against greed. One day, a sacred area was discovered by the developers. It was a circle of ancient stone surrounded by trees. It was a place where the Valari prayed, mourned, and celebrated. Generations had visited that place with quiet footsteps and respectful hearts. Without understanding its meaning, the developers decided it was the perfect location to build a large administrative building. When the Valari realized what was happening, they gathered every member of their community. Men, women, children, and elders stood before the sacred ground. Their faces carried sadness, not anger. They explained once more that this land could not be touched because it held not only history, but spirit. They begged the developers to choose another path. They reminded them that the world was vast and they did not need to destroy what was precious to others. For a moment, there was silence. It seemed like maybe, finally, they had reached some understanding. But the silence quickly broke when orders were given, and the machines continued moving forward. The sacred stones were torn from the earth. The oldest trees were cut. The place that once carried songs, tears, and prayers became dust. This was the moment everything changed. The Valari did not scream. They did not fight back, but something inside them broke. Their trust in humanity shattered. They realized they had been speaking to people who listened only to profit, not to heart. In the nights that followed, the Valari gathered together in quiet meetings. They spoke not in loud debate, but in heavy whispers. Their elders reminded them of old stories, stories of times when their ancestors had faced similar challenges. They were reminded of the lesson, when the land is no longer respected, the people must become like the wind. They must disappear and find a place where peace can live again. The Valari decided to withdraw, not as cowards, but as guardians of their way of life. They understood that the outsiders could destroy their physical homes, but they could never follow where the spirit of their community led. While the developers celebrated what they believed was progress, the Valari prepared silently. They did not pack heavy things. They took only what was essential: seeds, healing herbs, musical instruments, and the stories in their hearts. Their homes made of natural materials would return to the earth by themselves. They needed nothing more. On a moonlit night, without shouting, without grief, the Valari walked together into the deeper forests. Every footstep was soft, every breath calm. The mountains watched them as they moved, as if the land itself was guiding them to safety. By morning, the village was empty. No smoke from fires. No laughter of children. No footsteps in the paths. Just silence. When the developers arrived, they were confused. They searched the area for signs of struggle or violence, but found none. It was as if the people had vanished into the air. The fields remained, the homes remained, but the spirit of the land was gone. The developers believed they had won. They believed the land was now theirs. But they did not know that the land had been protected by love for generations, and when the Valari left, that love left with them. What the developers thought was victory was the beginning of their downfall. The land may accept visitors, but it does not accept those who destroy it. This was only the beginning of the consequences that would follow. The disappearance of the Valari should have been a warning, but the developers did not understand the meaning of silence. They believed that the Valari had abandoned the land out of fear or helplessness. They believed that now the land belonged to them completely, but they were wrong. The Valari had not left because they were weak. They had left because they were wise. They understood something the outsiders could not. When peace is destroyed, the land remembers. In the beginning, the developers continued their work without any hesitation. Bulldozers moved across the fields. Trees were chopped down faster than ever. The sound of metal striking earth filled the air day and night. Workers built temporary camps near the river, where the Valari once collected clean drinking water. But now even the river seemed different. The surface of the water looked darker, heavier, as if something in it had changed. The workers laughed, played loud music at night, cooked meals near the forests, and acted as if they had conquered something great. They did not know that the Valari had left behind not anger, but the quiet weight of consequence. They did not shout or threaten. They simply stopped giving the land their love, and without love, the land began to shift. The first signs were small. Birds stopped returning to the trees. Fish disappeared from the river. The crops planted by the developers did not grow, even though the soil looked fertile. The workers tried changing the seeds, watering more, adding fertilizers, but nothing helped. The soil that once grew healthy food for the Valari now rejected every attempt to force growth. Still, the developers ignored these signs. They believed science could solve everything. They believed nature could be controlled if they used the right tools. But nature was not listening to them. Nature remembered who had cared for it and who had harmed it. One day, a group of engineers tried to dig deeper into the land to lay a foundation for their large buildings. As they worked, the ground beneath them suddenly cracked. Not like a natural earthquake. This crack was silent and sudden, opening in a clean, straight line. The workers stepped back in shock. The machines began sinking slowly into the earth as if the land was swallowing them. No one could explain how or why. The developers called experts, but the experts had no answers. They said the land was unstable, but the Valari had lived there for generations without a single collapse. The elders of nearby villages started whispering, "The land does not want them here." The developers, however, rejected such beliefs. They were practical men. They believed only in data and measurements, but even the data began to fail them. The water tests showed no reason for contamination, yet workers fell sick after drinking from the river. The soil tests showed nutrients, yet seeds refused to grow. The machines were well maintained, yet they broke repeatedly as if something was resisting them. The workers began to grow uneasy. At night they heard sounds, soft singing like distant voices carried by the wind. Sometimes they saw shadows in the forest, but when they looked closely, nothing was there. It was not frightening, but it was unsettling. It felt as if the land still remembered the Valari's songs even though the people were gone. One evening, a worker sat near the remains of the sacred stone circle. The stones were broken now, scattered around like forgotten bones. As he sat, he felt a heavy sadness come over him. He could not explain it. He had never believed in spirits or ancient traditions, yet something inside him felt regret. He wondered what kind of people had once stood there singing and praying in peace, but he pushed the thought away. To him, emotion had no place in progress. As days passed, more workers fell sick. Some developed fevers that doctors could not explain. Some simply grew weak and tired, as if their energy was being drained. Many refused to continue working. They asked to leave, but the developers insisted they stay. They said there is no such thing as a cursed land. You are just tired. But inside, the workers felt something was deeply wrong. Then came the day that changed everything. A large ceremony was planned to officially start construction of the main building. Important officials and investors arrived with fancy vehicles and confident smiles. They gave speeches about development, modernization, and profit. They celebrated the land as if it were a trophy they had won. But as they spoke, the sky began to darken, not slowly but all at once, like a curtain being pulled across the sun. The air grew cold and heavy. The wind blew strongly, but there was no sound of leaves rustling. The forest stood still as if watching. The river began to swell, rising without rain. The officials tried to continue speaking, but their voices grew unsteady. A feeling spread across the crowd, a feeling of being unwelcome. Then the ground trembled. Not violently, not enough to cause destruction, just enough to warn. The officials looked around nervously. Some whispered, "Did we disturb something?" But the developers brushed it aside, insisting that everything would continue as planned. That night, as darkness spread, the workers gathered in their tents talking quietly. They remembered the Valari, not as backward people, but as people who understood something deeper. They began to realize that the Valari had not just lived here. They had been part of the land. Their love had kept the land alive. Their songs had kept the rivers clean. Their respect had kept the soil fertile. Now that love was gone, the land was rejecting its new caretakers. The workers wanted to leave, but the company refused. They had invested too much. They could not accept defeat. They believed they could overcome nature with more money, more equipment, more force. But nature was not something to defeat. It was something to respect or lose. One night, a strong storm came without warning. The wind howled, trees bent, and the river burst its banks. The workers ran for shelter, but many buildings collapsed. The heavy machines were swept away in the floodwaters. The developers, who once spoke boldly, now trembled in fear. This was not a natural storm. It felt like the land itself was pushing them away. By morning, the construction site was destroyed. The investors withdrew their funding. The company gave up. Workers left as quickly as they could, some whispering prayers, some silent, some crying without knowing why. The land stood quiet again, but it did not return to how it once was. The river no longer sparkled. The fields no longer smelled sweet. The land had closed itself. The developers failed to understand one simple truth. You cannot provoke what is peaceful and expect it to remain gentle. The Volari had not fought. They had simply walked away, taking with them the spirit that kept the land alive. And without that spirit, nothing could survive. From that day onward, no one dared to build on that land again. People avoided it. Even animals stayed away. Villagers told stories of what had happened, not as a warning of fear, but as a reminder peace is powerful. Silence is not weakness. Respect is everything. And those who ignore this lesson lose more than they can ever gain. When the developers left, they did not leave with dignity. They left with frustration, anger, and confusion. They could not understand how a land so rich and promising had turned into a place of failure and loss. They blamed weather, technical issues, and bad luck, but never their own actions. They never once thought that the land itself had responded to how it was treated. They did not realize that nature remembers everything, kindness and cruelty alike. When they abandoned the project, they left behind metal machines, broken structures, and wasted materials. The area that once looked full of life now looked wounded. Trees stood like silent guards around empty machinery. The river flowed, but without joy. The ground lay quiet, but not peaceful. It was a silence filled with memory. The nearby villagers watched from a distance. They had always respected the Volari and their way of life. They remembered how the Volari never took more than they needed, how they maintained balance instead of trying to control everything. Now the villagers whispered among themselves, saying, "The land rejected them because they came with greed." Yet the story did not end with the developers leaving. The land was no longer the same. The damage had already started. The soil that once gave life now resisted growth. Seeds died before sprouting. The river, once clear enough to see the pebbles at the bottom, now carried mud and moved slower than before. Even the air felt heavier, as if weighed down by sadness. For a long time, no one dared to go near the abandoned construction site. People believed the place had become cursed, not cursed by magic, but by broken respect. Even animals avoided the area. Birds did not sing there. No deer walked through the open fields. It was as if nature itself was mourning. Months passed, seasons changed, and grass began to grow around the abandoned metal machines. The metal rusted slowly. Wind blew dust across the dried ground. Rain fell, but it did not restore the soil. The land remained quiet and closed. But then, something unexpected began to happen. Travelers passing through the area reported seeing small signs of the Volari. Not directly, but in subtle ways. They claimed they found patterns of stones arranged neatly near hidden forest paths. They heard faint singing at night that sounded like the wind carrying voices. Some reported seeing distant lights deep inside the forest, soft, warm lights that flickered like fire lamps. No one could follow these lights. Whenever someone tried to approach, the lights disappeared. Some believed the Volari were still alive, living deeper in the mountains where no one could find them. Others believed the Volari had become one with the land, invisible but present in spirit. Whispers turned into stories. Stories turned into legends. Meanwhile, the company that once tried to build on Volari land suffered a silent downfall. Their failure became known. Investors refused to support them. Their reputation collapsed. One project after another was shut down. The developers lost money, property, and trust. They tried to restart their careers, but success slipped away from them again and again. It was as if something followed them, not a curse, but a lesson they had ignored. One of the former workers, a man named Darren, returned years later. He had not come for business or profit. He had been young when he worked on the construction site, and the memory of the Volari had stayed in his heart. He remembered their quiet strength, their gentle manner, and their deep respect for life. He remembered the sadness he felt the day the sacred stones were destroyed. He returned because he wanted to understand. Not to fix anything or rebuild anything, but simply to learn what he had missed. He walked slowly through the area. The broken machines were still there, now covered in moss and vines. Trees had grown taller, their roots twisting around metal. Nature was slowly healing itself, but the healing was slow and painful. Darren felt the weight of his past actions. He had not been the one making decisions, but he had taken part. He had stood there as the sacred ground was destroyed. He had stood silent when he should have spoken. He knelt down on the earth and whispered, "I am sorry." The wind moved through the trees softly. It did not answer, but it felt like it heard. That night, Darren camped near the old clearing. As he sat by a small fire, he heard something faint in the distance, a soft humming sound. Not frightening, but familiar. A gentle melody like a lullaby. It reminded him of the songs he had heard the Valari sing when he first arrived, back when peace still existed. He followed the sound slowly, step by step, careful not to disturb anything. The deeper he walked into the woods, the stronger the music became. Then he saw something. Small clay lanterns glowing softly along a narrow path. He felt his heart beat faster. He followed the lanterns until he reached a clearing hidden deep inside the forest. And there, standing quietly, were members of the Valari. They looked older, wiser, but still calm. Their clothes were simple. Their eyes were gentle. Their presence carried peace, the kind of peace that feels like warmth after a long winter. Darren did not speak. He did not know if he had the right. One of the Valari elders stepped forward. She was an old woman with silver hair and clear eyes. She looked at Darren not with anger, but with understanding. "You have come with a quiet heart," she said, "so the forest allowed you to find us." Darren felt tears in his eyes. "We destroyed what you loved," he said softly. The elder nodded. "Yes, but what we love is not gone. It has changed shape, but it still lives," Darren asked. "Why didn't you fight us?" The elder replied, "Fighting would have made us like those who harm. Peace is our strength, not our weakness. When peace is no longer respected, we take it with us." Darren listened, feeling every word. The elder continued, "A land is alive. It grows with love. It closes when wounded. You did not just destroy our home, you wounded the land's trust. But wounds can heal when understanding begins." Darren lowered his head. "I want to help heal it." The elder smiled gently. "Then begin by telling the world our story. Tell them that the earth is not soil to be owned. It is life to be respected. Tell them that peace is not silence, it is strength. Tell them that what was lost can return if the heart learns humility." Darren nodded. He understood now. He stayed with the Valari for some time, learning how they planted seeds with intention, how they spoke to the land, how they worked with patience instead of force. He learned that healing takes time, but time is the most loyal companion of those who respect it. When Darren finally left the forest, he did not take pictures or maps. He did not reveal their location. He carried only the lesson, and from that day forward, wherever he went, he told their story, not as a warning, but as a reminder. If you provoke what is gentle, you awaken something powerful. If you destroy what is peaceful, you lose what keeps life alive. And some civilizations do not disappear. They simply become unseen to those who do not deserve to find them. Many years passed, but the memory of the Valari and the vanished land did not fade. The story continued to travel from one person to another, carried like a quiet whisper. Some people believed it deeply. Others dismissed it as just a strange tale. But anyone who visited the old land, even from a distance, felt something. A silence that was not empty. A stillness that was not dead. It felt like the land was watching, waiting, remembering. As time moved forward, different groups of people tried to reclaim the land again. Some came with grand ideas of building resorts, tourist centers, or mining operations. They came with confidence, believing the failures of the past were simply mistakes. They told themselves, "We are smarter now. We have better technology." But technology does not heal a wound made by disrespect. And the land remembered that disrespect too clearly. Whenever new attempts were made to build on that land, something always happened. Machines broke. Workers got sick. Plans fell apart. Investors lost interest. It was as if nothing could be forced there anymore. Slowly, people began to avoid the area altogether. Villagers told their children, "If you walk there, walk with respect. Keep your voice low. The land sleeps. and it does not wish to be disturbed. Some adventurous travelers still passed through the region and shared stories of what they saw. A faint footprint beside a riverbank, though no one else was around. Smoke rising from a fire deep inside the forest, though no path led there. Soft humming at night like voices singing to the stars. No one ever saw the Valari closely, but everyone who heard or saw these signs felt a strange calmness, as if the Valari were not gone, only hidden, still existing in a place where only patience and peace could reach. But the world outside did not stay still. More villages grew into towns, towns became cities, and the cities became crowded and noisy. People began to lose touch with nature. Rivers became polluted. Forests were cut down, air turned heavy with smoke. Many people lived lives that felt fast, loud, and empty. They moved constantly, but rarely felt peace. And in that restless world, the story of the Valari began to feel more important. Teachers began telling the story to children, not as a fairy tale, but as a lesson. They explained that a land is not just something to use, it is something to care for. Elders told the story in quiet gatherings, reminding others that peace must be protected. Environmental groups spoke of the Valari as examples of how humans could live in balance instead of destruction. Slowly, people started asking themselves important questions. Why do we always want more? Why are we never satisfied? Why do we destroy what we depend on? In distant cities, one young woman named Mira heard the story. She was a researcher who studied plants and ecosystems. When she learned about the Valari, something inside her awakened. She felt that the story was not just history. It was guidance. She decided to travel near the region to learn more. She did not come with machines, notebooks, or a team. She came alone with respect. She walked through the forest quietly. She looked at the trees, listened to the river, and touched the soil gently. She sensed sadness in the land, but also strength. She spent days exploring, always careful not to disturb anything. She did not go searching for the Valari. She simply wanted to understand what they had understood. One evening, as she sat near the river, she saw something in the reflection of the water. For a moment, she saw a woman standing among the trees behind her. The woman wore simple clothing and her hair was braided. She looked at Mira with calm, steady eyes. Mira turned to face her, but no one was there. Only the trees, the river, and silence. But Mira did not feel afraid. She felt seen and accepted. She whispered, "I am here to learn, not to take." The wind moved softly through the leaves as if answering. Mira stayed for several days, observing and listening. She learned that healing takes time, not days or months, but generations. She understood that the land could recover, but only if humans learned humility again. She realized that the Valari were not hiding out of fear. They were protecting something sacred, peace itself. When Mira returned to the world outside, she did what Darren had done before. She told their story with honesty and respect. But Mira went even further. She spoke at schools, universities, meetings, and environmental gatherings. She explained how greed destroys, how peace strengthens, and how the Valari had shown that leaving is sometimes the greatest act of strength. Her words reached people's hearts. Small communities began practicing sustainable farming, taking only what they needed. Villagers planted trees instead of cutting them. People started using fewer chemicals and more natural methods. Children learned to see the earth as living, not just useful. The story of the Valari became a symbol, a reminder that civilization is not defined by how tall buildings are, but by how deeply people understand their connection to life. In time, the land where the Valari once lived began to show small signs of healing. Grass grew greener. Birds slowly returned. The river cleared little by little. The land had not forgotten how to flourish. It simply waited for respect to return. No one ever found the Valari directly. They remained unseen, living quietly somewhere beyond the reach of greed. Some believed they moved deeper into the mountains. Others believed they lived inside the forest where only those with pure hearts could walk. Some believed they were still human. Others believed they had become part of the land itself. But one truth was clear: they were never really gone. Their presence lived in every tree that grew back, every bird that sang again, every child who learned to care for nature, and every person who whispered thank you before touching the earth. Their lesson became something the world needed. Peace is not weakness. Gentleness is not ignorance. Respect is not surrender. A civilization does not disappear when it walks away. It disappears only when its values are forgotten. The Valari did not disappear. The world simply became too loud to hear them. But those who learn silence can still feel them. Those who learn respect can still follow their path. Those who learn patience can still see the world the way they did. Their civilization was not lost. It became invisible to those who had not yet learned how to see.